Hello, and welcome to Chapter 11. And this chapter is actually very interesting because it references Alan Turing, who most know as the father of computers. And when computers first came out, he had made an interesting point of saying that computers really hasn't solved a single problem, and instead it introduced a whole set of issues of learning how to use them effectively. So many of the factors have contributed to this problem. The first one being that technology rapidly increases in size and the complexity of programs makes it very hard to follow. And second issue is that programmers and users often think very differently from each other. So technology strongly influences our habits and way of thinking. Technology encourages cognitive problem-solving skills, and the design of technology often determines how they could be used. So people often invent new ways to use technology that weren't original intentions of the creators. And instructional designers are constantly confronting the sheer magnitude of the resources available to them. And the question is, these realities of technology ask how instructional designers should manage and adapt to these changes. So here we get into the problems and solutions of the new technology that teachers often have to deal with. It needs to determine what problems exist or are likely to exist, and then we have to use that information to determine a specific solution. So to approximately identify a problem, the stakeholders must be considered. And who are these stakeholders? Well, examples of stakeholders would be teachers, students, parents, administrators, and support staff, for example. Most issues that initially appear as problems are often symptoms to a larger problem. So for example, a large high school dropout could actually be the result of a poorly designed class or an unprepared group of teachers. So it's really important to identify what are symptoms and what are the root causes. And once the problems have been identified, they can be reinstated in terms of needs. We identify by problem, mission, then need for action. So in the previous example, the problem would be that high school dropouts often would not be properly prepared to succeed in life as adults. And the mission would be to prepare students as productive members of society. The need would be to increase the graduation rate and reduce the dropout rate. So the solution needs to be quantifiable to measure needed change and the tweaks and make an effectiveness. So therefore, an example of a prescribed solution would be to implement an appropriate intervention when students show signs of dropping out. This could come in the form of a human mentor or a virtual change agent to motivate. And lastly, cost considerations should be considered. Is the solution cost effective and doable? Because in reality, finance solutions are everything, so it's got to be a realistic solution. Alright, so now we talk about the users. Once a solution has been established, the next step would be to identify the preparedness of these users. Relevance factors include their previous interaction with the similar technology and the user's willingness to adapt and the perception of the technology. These are all very important things and determine how technology will be well received. So in groups, we'll separate them to 5 groups. They come in 5 forms. So first are the innovators, the early adapters, the early majority, late majority, and what they call the laggards. The innovators are pioneers who help spread the word. They'll effectively communicate the significance of a new technology. And the early adapters are the ones who are willing to try these new things. They add to the influence of bringing everyone else along, so they're a very important group. And the third group are the early majority, who will adopt the new change once the significance of that change has been demonstrated. They need to see that it's important, and they need to see that people are trying, and they need to be pushed to try this technology. And then you have a late majority who are skeptical of change adopt only when the vast majority has implemented the tool. And the laggards are very critical of anything new, and the reason why they're important is because you don't really want them to be the ones that are exposed to technology early on, because they might spread a bad word about them. So the reason that early adopters and the innovators are important is because it's important to identify all the laggards before the cynicism affects early adapters. We measure this with surveys, what kind of personality they are, and we identify them early. So it's important that we do identify them early, because we can convert the early majority into early adapters, and we do that by making them perceive its usefulness. So adoption and employment. So when we identify these users afterwards, technology deployment has really two parts. There's adoption and then there's deployment. And adoption refers to your use of technology, while deployment refers to making technology widely available. The larger the system to be deployed, the wiser it'll be to emphasize training to the early adopters in the process, because having a pilot group of early adopters is useful so that unforeseen problems can be detected. Also, new jargon is usually created with new technology, so we have to be sure that this jargon is well spread and understood. So it's best to adopt a system perspective in a systems perspective, see things in a system, and treat the parts of a planning, adoption, deployment as all interconnected. And finally, since technology changes, it's important to follow up and be able to measure what needs are constantly being met because technology, as you all know, are constantly flowing. It doesn't really stop much, so we have to constantly measure things in quantifiable means. So an example of this would be to measure teacher retention rates, changes in teachers' absenteeism, or changes in complaints to teachers, even that. So finding early and accurate indicators of success or failure is important in fixing these problems early and to limit these issues before they become widespread. Periodic surveys to users are helpful in identifying trouble spots, so they can also be useful in when it's time to move forward with the technology. So it's best to change gradually. That we make these changes gradually than all at once because this makes it easier to adapt by transition rather than throw a bunch of new things at the users. That's when you get a lot of laggards. You go back to the scale that we show. So it's easier to once we implement a technology that we put these changes gradually. So change management is a very complex and challenging task. And there are no one-size-fits-all solution that fits all circumstances. So as instructional designers, we are having to always have to measure the tools that we use. We have to be mindful of how we implement those tools, and we have to make it all work and adapt and flow accordingly. Because every time a new technology is introduced, we have we have the issues of trying to know how to work it, adapt how to work it, and that's really what chapter 11 is all about.